Just released tapes from the shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri could add even more fuel to the fire. Michael Brown's family is seething with anger. They say the footage conflicts with what police say transpired the day their son was shot and killed by Officer Darren Wilson. For the latest developments, let's go live to Stephanie Elam. She is in Ferguson, Missouri. What is the latest, Stephanie?
Good morning, Allison. When you take a listen to the audio from these police recordings, it gives another clue about what Darren Wilson, according to one alleged source, has said actually happened on August 9th. Take a listen yourself. These are the first images of Officer Darren Wilson in the white T-shirt, captured just hours after Michael Brown was killed on August 9th. It is unclear in the video if Wilson was suffering from any injuries, but police have said that Wilson sustained bruises and had a swollen face after his alleged struggle with Brown.
From the beginning, Dorian Johnson, who was with Michael Brown Jr., said the officer wasn't hurt that he saw.
The surveillance video obtained by the St. Louis Post-Dispatch shows Wilson leaving the police station after the shooting for the hospital. Later, the video shows him returning, according to the paper. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch also obtained police audio, publishing a timeline of events from that day, beginning with a theft.
Okay, we're taking a stealing in progress from 9101 West Florissant.
19 seconds later, dispatch issues a description of a suspect.
He's with another male. He's got a red Cardinals hat, white T-shirt, yellow socks, and khaki shorts. He's walking up back to the...
Minutes later, Officer Wilson offers assistance.
21 to 25 or 22. You guys need me?
The paper says shortly after, Officer Wilson stops Brown and his friend Dorian Johnson for walking in the middle of the street. Officer Wilson calls for backup.
21, put me on Canfield with 2 and send me to our car.
According to the paper's timeline, Brown's fatal encounter with Wilson took less than 2 minutes. At 12:07, this call came in with someone apparently screaming in the background.
25.
Get us several more units over here. There's going to be a problem.
And as the grand jury decision looms about whether or not Darren Wilson will be indicted, people here in Ferguson are on edge. I've had multiple conversations with people who live here, many afraid to go on camera because they don't want any blowback, but they just hope that there aren't the massive protests that have been rumored to happen here, and if there are protests, that they're not violent, Allison.
Absolutely. Everyone is hoping that. Stephanie Elam, thanks so much for that report. Let's get over to Chris.
All right, so what is any of this new information going to mean legally? Let's bring in CNN legal analyst Paul Callan and attorney and radio personality Mo Ivory. What moves you here? First, let's deal with the video. You know, CNN reporting had knocked down the idea of there being any significant injury or orbital fracture. There were a lot of rumors coming out early on, but what do you take when you look at it?
I don't take a lot from the video because it's sort of that grainy black and white video.
Much.
But the other thing I think that's even more important, we don't know what Wilson said about his own injuries.
That's right.
These things are based on what other police officers said, and they may have exaggerated it to try to help their fellow cop. What I'd like to know is, what did he say about his injuries? That's the only thing that would be relevant. And of course, you have independent medical records that will verify it one way or the other.
Sending him to the hospital. You need to know whose decision that was, or whether or not that's just routine.
I don't think so, because that's a routine. It's a shooting incident. He probably did get a scratch or a bruise, which was one of the descriptions, and certainly you'd send an officer to the hospital.
By everybody's account, Mo, they were fighting at the car. I mean, we know that. But when you see the video, anything stand out to you?
Well, what stands out to me most, and I would agree that legally we would need to hear from Officer Wilson, but what stands out to me is, first of all, Officer Wilson's size. We haven't had much of his size, and, you know, he's a very large man. So for me, it sort of just put into perspective a little bit about this, you know, always calling Michael Brown a quiet giant, but never sort of referring to actually Officer Wilson was his same size or bigger. So I really wonder about the threat in Officer Wilson's mind at the time. That's just something that stuck out to me. Whether that can be used legally or not, I'm not sure, but it stuck out to me. Also, the time, 2 hours before he went to the hospital with a lawyer at that, makes me question why at no point was their incident report done. We still don't have a comprehensive incident report from Darren Wilson.
Yeah.
And it just is a little bit troubling to me that for 2 hours they sat there and discussed a plan, and then they took him to the hospital with a lawyer, and then he returned back to the police station for an additional additional 2 hours, at which no time an incident report was
Well,
done.
of course, there's no evidence that anybody was discussing a plan. I mean, maybe that happened, Mo,
Paul,
but there's
Paul,
no evidence
hours,
that a plan
yes,
was being discussed.
but for 4 hours, nobody decided to write an incident
Right, but here's
report.
the thing. Mo,
That's
you've
what
said that
bothers me.
before. Others have said it. I checked with Ferguson police officers. I checked with St. Louis police officers. I checked with members who are in the authority structure of the police. They say that this is not a normal incident. When you have something like this, the reporting requirements of filing a report are different. That very often, when there's a potential union issue, the filing requirements are different. So, Paul, couldn't it just be that this is a different situation and there was no intent not to report? It's just how this situation went.
That may be, and it also may be an officer who is so upset and so frazzled he can't file the report. I know, for instance, in New York, the police union gets involved right away and a lawyer gets involved. There were reports early on in this case that the St. Louis Police Department had taken over the investigation and that maybe for that reason he didn't file the report. Ultimately, I don't know. He may look very bad for having delayed filing the report, but certainly whether you did your paperwork on a timely basis or not is not what this case is going to fall or rise on.
Mo, I want to ask you about the timeline again. First, important to note, this is not a leak, okay? This information came out from the St. Louis Dispatch as a function of their sunshine laws. You know, they're asking for things, demanding to be made public. That's how it got out. So it's not a leak. When you talk about the duration here, 2 minutes is actually a long time when we're dealing with violent activity and you know, horrible situations like this. Could be a lifetime for the victim involved and maybe the shooter as well. What do you take from it?
Well, when I started to hear the audio, you know, I felt that the first thing I thought was that Officer Wilson wasn't really even involved in this incident at all. At first, there was a dispatch, there were other officers that were on the way, and he sort of got involved after saying, like, do you need my help? And then after that, we don't hear anything. He goes, and at first when he comes into contact with Dorian and with Michael Brown, he was not even aware that those were the two. He had not heard the description. So I really, this only goes back to what we sort of already knew, that robbery at the market had nothing to do with him stopping Michael Brown and Dorian Johnson. Those other officers were the ones that were on the way to the scene. So I don't really think that the audio does anything, but the timeline in terms of the minutes tells me that this was a very quick thing that happened. There was reaction, adrenaline was pumping. I mean, that's what that kind of tells me. But it doesn't say anything
also,
to me different about the description that he heard on the audio.
You had mixed information also on this early on, that the officer did know, that he didn't know.
Yes.
The audio seems to make it pretty clear he knew about the robbery. Whether or not he identified these two kids, he doesn't point that out in his own description. And frankly, from most of the accounts we've heard, he doesn't approach them asking them about the robbery.
Well, no, and I think people have to remember, and the audio confirms this, although we're trying to put together scraps of information and form a cogent explanation as to what went down. But what's clear is, noontime, he's on a radio call for a sick baby. When he comes back from that radio call, and there had been things about the robbery going on over the radio, kind of as he's getting out of his cruiser, which maybe he hears in the background. But then there are two incidents. The first, he stops the two men, Dorian Johnson and Michael Brown, because they're walking down the middle of the street. Clearly, Mo's right. There's no robbery involved in that. He doesn't know anything about it. But then something clicks. He looks, probably in his rearview mirror, and Michael Brown has got the, you know, he had Swisher cigars in his hand and he was dressed the same way. And it may be that now he says, these are the guys in the robbery. And all of a sudden he backs the car up. And that's when the incident starts. That's how I put it all together and think
and Paul,
the thing went down.
Paul, I agree with that. I think that he did, at the point at which he backed up, realize this may be the two that I'm hearing about.
Right.
But to me, that doesn't change anything in the case, because this has been the conjecture that he realized it was them, and then he pulls Michael Brown into the car. It really doesn't change the main question, which is, did he use excessive force once Michael Brown was, you know, they were face to face?
Look, the biggest problem we're dealing with right now in this situation is the anticipation of the outcome. This grand jury has to take its time, but they have to come to a conclusion. It has to be made public, and then the community has to deal with it one way or the other. Mo Ivory, Paul Callan, thank you very much. We'll continue the discussion. Allison.